Montana Territory. Autumn of 1879, the wind howled over the ragged hills near the Musselshell River as Katherine Vale drove the last nail into the broken barn door, her hands raw, her breath white in the cold. The hammer fell from her grip, clattering against the frozen ground. She did not bend to pick it up. The ranch was gone. Not in timber or land the house still stood. The corral still held 4 half-starved cows, but in coin. That morning, she had handed over her last dollar to a sharp-faced man from Roundup who had sold her a wagon wheel that snapped the minute she set it down. "Should have known," she muttered, wiping her hands on her skirt, eyes burning. "Should have known better." There were no more cattle to sell. No more neighbors to borrow from. No more husband. Cal died 2 winters ago in a stampede that crushed his ribs like twigs, leaving her with a ranch and a name and nothing else. She had held on. Through drought, through locusts, through 2 years of being the only woman for miles in any direction. But now the pantry was empty, the stove cold, and the bank would not wait much longer. She turned, stiff from the cold, and stepped off the porch just as a rider crested the edge of the ridge behind the house. He came slow, leading a pack mule, his boots dusty, hat low over his brow. The sun caught the brass on his saddle and the worn leather scabbard of his rifle. He was tall, lean-shouldered, with a dark coat flapping against the wind. A stranger, but not a boy. A man. He slowed as he neared the house, raising one hand in peace. "Afternoon," he said, voice low but clear. "You the owner here?" Katherine squared her shoulders. "I am. You lost?" "No, ma'am. Name's Owen Jett. Was riding west toward Helena. Saw your smoke a mile back. Thought maybe you had a spare place by the stove." She hesitated. Every bone in her body screamed to turn him away. But the wind bit deeper and the silence in the house behind her felt heavier than ever. "You traveling alone?" she asked. He nodded. 3 weeks now, just me and the mule. I can pay for a meal." She almost laughed. "Then you have more than I do." He tilted his head. "You in trouble?" Katherine folded her arms. "I'm not in the habit of sharing my business with strangers." "I respect that," he said, dismounting. He tied his reins to the post and stepped back, keeping his hands where she could see them. "But if you let me rest a spell, I can fix that wheel leaning against the shed. And if there's wood to split, I'll split it." She eyed him. There was no hunger in his gaze, no pity either. Just calm steadiness, like a man who had seen worse and kept walking anyway. She stepped aside. "Supper's thin. Woodpile's behind the house. You want to earn your keep, you can start there." He tipped his hat. "Fair deal." By dusk, smoke curled steady from the chimney. Owen had repaired the wheel, split enough wood to last 3 days, and patched the hole in the barn roof without saying more than a dozen words. Katherine had boiled the last potatoes and made flatbread with stale flour, watching him from the window as he worked. He did not ask questions. Did not press. Just worked with sure hands and a quiet presence that made the house feel less hollow. That night, she poured him coffee in a chipped tin mug and sat across from him at the table, the lantern between them casting golden light across the worn wood. "Was Cal your husband?" he asked, voice gentle. She stiffened. "You saw the grave." "I buried my brother, 20 years old. Fever took him fast. I know what grief looks like." She nodded once. "He died out there," she said, voice flat, "under the cattle. I found him with his hand still gripped around the reins." Owen drank his coffee, quiet. "I am sorry." She looked down at her hands. "I have nothing left, Owen. No money, no help. I gave my last dollar to a man who cheated me, and now I have 4 cows and a pantry with nothing in it." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. "What do you want to do?" She blinked at him. "What? If you had what you needed, what would you do?" She swallowed hard. "I would keep the land. I would fix the fences. I would bring in hay before the snow. I would make it through one more winter." He nodded. "Then let me help." Her brow furrowed. "Why?" He gave a slow shrug. "Because I can and because I want to. You do not know me." "I know enough. I know you are still here when most would have run. I know you have not asked for anything, even when you needed it. That tells me plenty." She stared at him, heart thudding. "I do not have anything to give you." Owen smiled softly. I did not ask for anything. For a long moment they sat in silence, the wind rattling the windows. Then she said, "You can sleep in the barn, it is warmer than it looks." "I will be fine anywhere," he said, standing. "Thank you." As he stepped outside, she watched him go, something heavy in her chest easing just a little. He was not a savior, he was not Cal, but he was kind and steady. And for the first time in months, she did not feel entirely alone. The next morning he was already outside when she stepped onto the porch. Tools in hand, sleeves rolled, eyes bright in the pale dawn. "You ready to work?" he asked. She pulled on her gloves, smiling before she could stop herself. "Always." And somewhere deep in her chest, something warm began to stir. The first frost came 2 nights later, silvering the pasture before dawn. Katherine stepped into the cold with a bucket in each hand, breath trailing behind her as she crossed to the lean-to. Owen was already outside, hauling water from the well in a quiet rhythm that matched the early hush. He didn't glance over, but nodded once as she passed. By mid-morning, the ice had melted off the troughs, and the cows stood nosing the last of the dry grass. She found him kneeling near the south fence line, hammering rusted nails into a warped rail. "I was going to leave that," she said, setting down a sack of feed. "It's too far gone." "Not all of it," he replied without looking up. "This post's still solid. Rest just needs bracing." She crouched beside him, brushing dirt from the base. The soil smelled of iron and old snow, and the wind had calmed for once. "You always fix what you don't have to." "No," he said, squinting at the horizon. "Just what matters." They worked in silence after that, the kind that settles when 2 people share the same weight. When the sun dipped low, she straightened and winced as her back pulled tight. "You should rest," he said. "I've rested enough this year," she answered, brushing her hands off on her coat. "Come on, we've got 2 boards left." He didn't argue. When they finished, she leaned against the fence and looked out toward the hills. The light caught in her lashes, and for a moment the land didn't look so tired. "You ever stay in one place long?" she asked. "Not in years." "Why?" He rested his arms on the top rail. "Too many ghosts." She waited. He didn't go on. "You run from them?" "No," he said. "I ride ahead of them." She watched him a long while. "You afraid they'll catch up?" Owen turned toward her then, eyes steady. "They always do." That night she brought out a jar of canned peaches she'd hidden behind the flour sack, her last sweet thing. She set them on the table without ceremony, poured 2 bowls, and sat across from him. He lifted his spoon. "You sure?" "They were never meant to last past winter." He nodded and took a bite. "My mother used to can peaches. She'd boil them in whiskey and cloves, said it kept the cold from biting so hard." She smiled faintly. "My mother never canned a thing in her life. She hated the dirt, thought North Carolina was the edge of wilderness." Owen tilted his head. "You came from there?" "I left when I was 20. Married Cal on the trail west. We were meant to settle near Dillon, but he liked the open better." She glanced down at her bowl. "I haven't said his name out loud in months." "You don't have to," he said. "I want to," she replied, voice low. He was stubborn. Wouldn't stop for directions even when we were turned around for a day, but he could charm a grizzly if he thought it'd listen. She looked up. He loved this land. "Even when it tried to break us." "I can see why." She studied him. "You don't talk like a man who drifts for no reason." "I don't drift," he said slowly. "I search." "For what?" He didn't answer at first. "Then, a place that feels like it forgives a man for what he's done." Her hand tightened around the spoon. "Does that place exist?" "I don't know," he said. "But this land, it doesn't ask questions. It just wants you to keep going." Katherine stood and carried the bowls to the basin. She rinsed them in silence, the water cold against her skin. "You can stay as long as you're willing to work," she said. "I intend to." She dried her hands on her apron. "I'll be checking the north well tomorrow. The pump's near useless." "You handy with iron?" "I can manage." She nodded once and turned toward the stairs. He called after her, voice low. "Katherine." She paused at the bottom step. "You saved the peaches." She looked over her shoulder. "You fixed the fence." A beat passed between them, quiet, solid, unspoken. Then she climbed the stairs without another word. The wind shifted on the third day, bringing the scent of snow from the mountains. Katherine stood in the root cellar, lantern in hand, sorting through what little remained. The potatoes were soft at the eyes and the onions had started to sprout. She held an apple, bruised and shriveled but still clinging to what sweetness it had left, and set it gently aside. It was the last one. Above ground, Owen was hammering something against the side of the bunkhouse. She heard the even rhythm of his work through the packed earth above her head. When she came up, blinking against the gray light, he was standing on a crate, nailing a strip of canvas over a broken window pane. "You'll lose heat through that if it's left open," he said as he stepped down. "I never had time to patch it," she replied, brushing dirt from her skirts. "That bunkhouse hasn't seen a visitor since the cattle drive 3 springs ago." "I figured." He adjusted his coat. "But you might come winter." She looked toward the hills. "Only thing coming this winter is cold." "Maybe not," he said. "I passed some trappers a week east of here. Said the railroads pushing north come spring could bring more folks through." She crossed her arms. "I'm not set up to feed strangers. You could be if you had help." She met his gaze. "You offering again?" "I am." They stood in the yard as a hawk circled overhead, the quiet between them filling like water in a cracked pail. "Why'd you leave the trail west?" she asked after a moment. Owen ran his thumb over the edge of his glove. "I didn't mean to. I was headed for the Bitterroots. Got turned around after my mule threw a shoe, ended up farther north than I planned. And you stayed anyway." He looked out past the fence line. "Didn't feel right to keep riding." She studied him. "You always follow hunches, only when they don't go away." That night she brought out a tin box from beneath the floorboards. Inside were a few coins, a cracked ring, and a folded paper with a rough map drawn by Cal's hand. She laid it on the table between them. "There's a spring here," she said, pointing with her finger. "Up past the ridge. Cal marked it, but we never cleared a trail, said it was too much work for too little water." "Still might be worth opening," Owen said. "Could run a trough down if the flow's steady." She nodded. "If the line's not frozen," he leaned back. "You've got a good spread, the bones of it are strong. What it needs now is time and hands." She closed the tin. "I've got one of those, I've got the other." The lantern crackled softly. She stood and poured water from the kettle into the wash basin. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "The life before?" He took a moment before answering. "Sometimes, but I don't look for it anymore." She wrung out the cloth. "What do you look for now?" He watched her hands. "Something that holds." She folded the cloth slow, deliberate. "Not much does." His voice was quiet. "Some things do if they're tended." She set the cloth aside. "There's fence to ride tomorrow. East line hasn't been walked this season. I'll saddle up at first light." She paused at the doorway. "It's near the place where Cal went down." Owen stood, reaching for his coat. "Then I'll ride beside you." She didn't answer, but her hand lingered on the doorframe before she climbed the stairs. Outside, the stars had come out, crisp and sharp above the pines. Owen stepped onto the porch and looked toward the barn, where the mule slept and the cold curled around the roof like breath. He didn't feel restless. He didn't feel like leaving. And for the first time in years, he felt the land beneath him settle instead of shift. The east fence ran crooked near the bluff, where the land dropped off in a tumble of dry stone and scrub. Katherine rode ahead, her mare careful on the uneven slope, while Owen kept a steady pace behind atop the gelding he'd traded for 2 towns back. The morning was brittle with cold, but the sky had cleared and the clouds had blown east. She dismounted first, walking the edge where a post had tipped sideways, half dragged down by shifting ground. He tied the reins around a cedar snag and joined her, glancing at the packed earth. "You reckon this'll hold another season?" he asked. "If the frost doesn't heave it worse," she said, kneeling to press her hand against the base. "Cal always meant to sink a deeper anchor here, never got to it. We should dig it out and reset it with stone," he said. "Won't take the day." She looked up. "You always this quick to speak like you belong." He met her eyes. "Do you want me to stop?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "No." They worked side by side, pulling the post free and hauling in rocks from the slope. The wind picked up once, lifting her hair from her collar, and she tucked it beneath her scarf without looking at him. He didn't fill the silence with anything unnecessary. By noon, the post stood straight again, braced by a ring of stone and dirt tamped firm. She leaned on the handle of the spade, sweat cooling along her spine. "You ever build something from the ground up?" she asked. "Helped raise a barn in Kansas when I was 17, he said. "Belonged to a girl's family, thought staying might mean something. Did it?" He shook his head. "Storm took the roof before the year was out. Her father blamed me for the bad luck. I left before he could make good on his threats." She studied him. "You always leave when it turns hard." "I used to," he said. "Now I wait long enough to know if it's worth staying." She turned back toward the bluff. "And is this?" "I'm still here." They rode the rest of the fence line without words. When they reached the far pasture, she called for a halt and swung down, walking toward a narrow cluster of cottonwoods that leaned against the creek. He followed, noting how she moved slower here, her steps more cautious. She stopped near a flat stone half sunk into the grass. A wire cross stood at its head, bent slightly from weather. "I buried him here," she said. "It was too far from the house to haul the body back, and I couldn't look at him every day knowing I'd still be breathing while he wasn't." Owen rested a hand on the saddle horn. "You don't owe me that, I know," she said. "But you're the only one who's asked without expecting something in return." She crouched, brushing lichen from the stone's edge. "I kept thinking if I worked hard enough, if I held on long enough, maybe the land would give something back. But it doesn't work like that, it just takes." He stepped close, not touching her. "It gives too, not fast, not kind, but it gives." She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "I want a life that doesn't vanish every time the wind shifts." "You can build that," he said. "Not alone," he nodded once. "Then don't be." They rode back as the sun dipped low, casting red light across the hills. When they reached the yard, she handed him her reins without asking, and he stabled both horses as she stepped inside. Later, she lit the small lamp on the table and set out 2 mugs without ceremony. He entered quietly, wiping his hands on a rag. "You need anything else tonight?" She looked up. Her voice was even. "I need you to stay." He froze, rag still in hand. "I don't mean for a week," she said. "Or until the next trail calls you. I mean stay, for good, if you want to." He folded the cloth slowly, setting it aside. "I've been carrying my saddle from place to place for 6 years. Never thought I'd put it down." Her fingers curled against the table's edge. "Then maybe it's time you did." He crossed the room, his boots soft against the plank floor, and stood before her with nothing between them but the lamplight and the sharp quiet of decision. "If I stay," he said, "I'll build with you, not for you, not over what was." "But with," her voice didn't waver. "That's what I'm asking." He reached for her hand, rough palm closing gently around hers. "Then I'm yours, Katherine, and this place, this life, it's ours now." She didn't cry. She didn't falter. She only held on tighter, the weight they'd both carried finally setting down between them, not as a burden but as a foundation. Outside, the frost crept in again. But inside, the fire was steady, and neither of them would face another winter alone. Snow came hard that winter, layering the hills in quiet. By early December, the drifts along the pasture fence reached Katherine's waist, and the trail to the well had to be shoveled anew each morning. Owen built a sled from scrap wood and iron fittings he'd salvaged from the old hay rake, hitching the gelding to it when the snow got too deep for boot travel. The work never stopped, but it had changed rhythmic, shared, a steady joining of effort and breath and purpose. Inside, the house held warmth it hadn't known in years. They had patched every draft, lined the windows with oilcloth, and strung drying herbs from the rafters. Katherine rose early to tend the fire, and when Owen came in from the barn, she handed him coffee without speaking. It had become a kind of language gesture, glance, the soft press of fingers as mugs changed hands. One morning, with the wind easing and the sky clear, Owen stood at the window sharpening a blade. "You ever think of leaving again?" Katherine asked, her back to him as she kneaded dough at the table. He didn't look up. No, she turned, wiping her hands on her apron. Not even when the snow traps us in for days, when the roof groans like it might give, he set the blade down. I've lived through worse with less reason to stay. She crossed to him, her hands still dusted in flour. We never talked about spring. We don't have to yet. I want to, she said. I've been thinking about what we could plant. The lower field's never been used. Cal always said the slope made it poor for grazing. Owen nodded slowly. Could put in barley. Maybe beans along the rise. I was thinking corn. You'd need good seed. I've got some saved from the last harvest before, well before. He didn't speak right away. Then, if you're ready to plant, I'm ready to stay through the growing. She studied his face. No more trail, no more trail. That night, after supper, she brought out the ledger her mother had given her when she left Carolina. Its leather was cracked, the pages yellowed with time, but her handwriting still filled its margins notes on feed ratios, on calving seasons, on debts and dates and repairs. She turned to the back where the pages were still blank and handed it to Owen. I want your hand in this now, she said. He took it gently. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. He opened the book and with careful strokes wrote the date and a single line beneath it. Broke ground together. They spent the rest of that winter in slow, deliberate rhythm. Owen built a second coop for laying hens, and Katherine mended every seam in the barn roof. They traded pelts to the trapper who passed through in February, and with the coins, purchased salt, flour, and a coil of twine. When the weather softened, they walked the pasture before first melt, marking where the new fence would go, where the trough would run from the spring. One night in March, as the last of the snow shrank into the gullies, Katherine stood in the doorway watching the dusk settle. If you hadn't come over that ridge, she said, I wouldn't have made it through. He stepped behind her, his hands resting lightly at her waist. If I hadn't, I'd still be riding without purpose. She turned to face him, the light behind her casting his eyes in shadow. Are you still searching for a place that forgives? I'm not searching anymore, he said. They married in the spring, beneath the cottonwoods near the old grave. Katherine wore her mother's brooch pinned to her collar, and Owen shaved for the first time in a month. The preacher came from Roundup, riding up with a book and a smile, and when he left, he took with him a basket of eggs and the sound of laughter from a house that had once held only silence. They planted corn in the lower field. It came up strong. The barley took, too, and by late summer, they were both sunburned and grateful. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, her feet propped on the railing, his arm behind her on the bench. They spoke little, but when they did, it was of next season, of what to build next, of what they might raise together come another year. In early autumn, she found herself humming again in the kitchen, the rhythm of her work light. Owen came in from the barn, smelled the bread baking, and kissed her temple without a word. That night, they opened the ledger again. Beneath Owen's line, Katherine wrote in her neat, steady hand, "Began the life we chose." The ranch stood solid through the next winter and every one after that. And inside, by the fire, two people sat with hands entwined, building a future not from what they had lost, but from what they had chosen together and for good.